All right. So today, today I want to talk to us about something that has really been a joy to my heart in just examining, and the topic of my message today is the search for truth. The search for truth. Now, it is true that truth is a much talked about commodity. Isn't that right? In fact, I'll tell you something. Politicians claim to speak it. Pastors says they preach it. The media announce that they broadcast it. But how do we know what is truth? How do we know what is truth? And I want to start at the beginning. And at the beginning, we need the question, what is truth? I believe it's essential. I believe it's essential for us to understand. The question itself is essential because if we don't know what we are looking for, how would we know if or when we have found it? So I believe it's essential for us. I'm thinking back, and I remember how that God told Samuel that he has rejected Saul, and that God said to him that he was to go to a certain place and he was to anoint one of the sons of Jesse to be king in Saul's stead. I'm sure you remember the story. Anyway, Samuel was kind of afraid of Saul, but God told him, to do some things. He said, bring a sacrifice with you so Saul won't know what you're about. And so Samuel went, and here's the interesting thing. Does what God told him, going from what God said, Samuel went and saw Jesse's first son Eliab. And what did Samuel say? Do you remember? Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. That's what Samuel said. But God said to Samuel, no, 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 Samuel, I think you're doing it wrong. God actually said to Samuel in First Kings 16, God said to Samuel, look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. So often we hear that phrase used, that verse used. The Lord looketh on the man look on the outward, but God sees the heart. And most people don't remember or even have a clue where that came from. But that was because of that story. So Samuel had ideas in his mind, but it was not what God planned. Um, but then came the other son was brought, Abinadab, I think it was, and then Shammah. In fact, all seven sons passed before Samuel, and God said, none of these sons are to be king. So Samuel asked David, don't you have another son, David? So all seven sons passed before Samuel, and God said, none of these. So Samuel asked, do you have another? And the other that was not there, that other one was to be king. And who was he? He was David. Now, this is the perspective I want us to have as it relates to truth. We need to understand clearly what we're dealing with, so we can better discern and know, so we won't guess based on what we see or based on the size of the building or based on the amount of people, right? Because God does not see as we see. And that I want you to keep that in mind. Now, the word know, K-N-O-W, carries a variety of meanings. In fact, I looked at these meanings, and the word actually means, it has, as I said, a whole lot. But the word means to perceive directly, to have direct cognition of, to have understanding of, to recognize the nature of. But it's interesting that in a dictionary, I found a meaning that is interesting. It says it's an archaic meaning, but the word know, K-N-O-W, actually means to have sexual intercourse with. That's an interesting perspective that I've never seen in a dictionary before. Now, the idea is clearly scriptural. The idea is clearly it's used in the Old Testament in the past tense. The word Knew. You know how it says that Adam knew his wife and she conceived. So the word know in the past tense in the Old Testament has that connotation of sexual intercourse. But that idea, I think, is also widely known, because I've even thought about this word of carnal knowledge. And carnal knowledge actually represent having raped a person or something like that, right? But it has to do with that word knowledge is not just head knowledge. It's not just something that you know inside your mind. The word know can also mean an experience. That's what I want you to consider as we look at truth. So for us to know truth, we must be aware of, one, the identity of truth. Let me ask you a question. Is truth a factual statement? Yes, it can be expressed in theory. Truth can be a factual statement. In fact, let me say this. For the world, or in the world, truth is that which is spoken. Truth is theoretical. Truth is facts in theory, or facts written in a statement. But in Christianity, truth is very different. And that is what I'm expecting to explore with us this morning here, this afternoon here. The dictionary's view of the word truth caught my attention, because it's not a religious book, but I like what is said here about truth. I'll read for you what the dictionary says truth is. Truth is, listen to this now, conformity to fact or actuality. I love that. Truth is conformity to fact or actuality. And I'll tell you why that makes sense. Because you know how that Paul, in writing to the Hebrews, says, be not conformed to the world, but be transformed. Here the dictionary is making clear that truth is conforming to fact or actuality. Truth is reality. Truth is actuality. It is something that is real. It is something that is actual. I would almost say tangible. And you'll see as I go on. Truth, it says, when used in theology or philosophy, truth is that which is considered to be the ultimate ground of reality. And I love that, the ultimate ground of reality. So let me ask you then, if truth is reality, what is falsehood? If truth is reality, can falsehood be reality? In other words, can you know? See, we just look at the word know. Can you know what is false? Can you know error? Because I want you to see that this word know is really more an experience. And it's an experience. So if something is false, can you experience something that is false? I would say that's impossible. If something is erroneous, can you experience something that is erroneous? It's impossible, because falsehood and error is not reality. You can never experience falsehood or error, because it is not factual, it is not actual, and it is not real. That's my perspective. Anyway, I'm interested in a passage that Jesus had, where Jesus had a conversation with the Jews, and you're probably familiar with this one. And this is in the book of John. What did I do? John. This is in the book of John, chapter 8. And in John chapter 8, Jesus had this conversation with the Jews, and I'm going to read for you just like two verses. It says this, or it says, then said Jesus to those Jews, verse 31. Then said Jesus to those Jews which believed on him, if you continue in my word, then are you my disciples indeed. Look at what he says next. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Very interesting passage. He says, if you continue in my word, then are you my disciples indeed. But look at what he says next. He says, if you continue in my word, he says, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Now let me ask you a question. If truth is the correct understanding of words and expression, how could words and expression set the Jews free. How could that have happened? Even the Jews themselves says we were never in bondage to any man, right? But what was Jesus talking about? Was Jesus talking about the understanding we have of truth, that truth is a factual statement or a correct statement? Can that really set you free from sin? But the Jew says we were never in bondage to any man. But was that even true? I mean, I'm not even looking at that now, but was that even true what they said, that they were never in bondage to any man? Weren't the same Jews, weren't they the same ones that were were slaves in Egypt for over 400 years? Weren't the same folks that Nebuchadnezzar, when he overthrew Israel, captured all of these people, including Daniel and his friends? Weren't they not captives for another 70 years in Babylon? But they said they were never in bondage to any man. How could they have said such a thing when in fact they were? Now, what I want you to consider is something that I've come to look at myself. What I've come to realize is that if you were born in something, if you were born and grown up in a certain culture, that becomes the norm. You know, recently I was thinking about that if the culture of mask wearing continues, then we are going to have another generation. I mean, young children are being programmed now to do this, right? Now to wear masks and to not go anywhere without it. But consider, if this continues, you're going to have a generation of young children who the wearing of for whom the wearing of masks will be the norm. And in that generation, those who goes without the mask are going to be those who are the weird ones, those who are a threat to society. So there is always that conditioning. And I'm mentioning this because I believe that there was that conditioning of the people, the Jews. They were conditioned to believe that they were God's chosen people, that they were the seed of Abraham. In fact, they said that they were descendants of Abraham, and they could prove it. That was true, that they could prove that their lineage went all the way back to Abraham. But my question is, was that what Jesus was talking about? The same was true that the Jews themselves were enslaved by their carnal nature, but they did not see that. They did not realize that. In fact, did you know that the Jews today don't believe in sin, that they are in sin? They don't believe that, right? But this is what Jesus wanted to bring out, because here's the thing. They believe that their heritage gave them diplomatic immunity, and so they are different from everybody else. And in fact, I've seen and you're seeing where even today in the Christian world, for some strange reason, I see a lot of these television evangelists and all that are pointing people back to Israel and making Israel this big thing, and we're all going to, because it's God's people. And it comes from this, that the Old Testament presented them as God's people, and that, you know, there are all these promises that makes them believe that that has never changed, that they are still God's people, even when they pull away from God, has gone into idolatry and so on. They still believe that this still remains because God made a promise in the Old Testament. But Jesus made it clear that those who are sinning, those who are sinners, I'm trying to get that thought back. Jesus made it very clear to them that those who are committing sin are slaves. They didn't realize that. Those who are committing sin are slaves to sin. And so he's making that known to them. He's telling them, look, if you are still sinning, if you are sinners, then you have a master that rules over you, and that master is sin. That's what he said. In fact, that was in the next verse, I think. The verse 34, it says, verily I say unto you, Jesus said, whosoever committed sin is the servant of sin. So he was making it known to them that as long as sin was in their lives, that they were slaves. They needed to be made free. Now I'm going to set something in stone here, and that will not be changed or removed, because it's what Jesus said. Just the one proof that we can use to know if we have been set free from sin is whether or not, if we've been set free, is whether or not we are still sinning. I want you to keep that in mind. The one proof that makes you know if you have been set free is whether or not you're sinning. You're still sinning. If you are still living in sin, you are still a slave. If you are still practicing sin, you are still a slave. Because what Jesus eventually said in verse 36, he says, he that the Son has set free is free how? Indeed. If he has set you free, he can't set you free from something that is still in your life, that is still antagonizing you. He can't set you free from something that is still a problem in your life. For example, freedom from sin can only be had or can only be experienced by deliverance from sin. Until you're delivered from sin, you're not free from sin. And what Jesus brought was deliverance from sin. Because remember, what we're talking about is the search for truth. Only the Son of God can deliver you from the bondage of sin. Let me ask you a question. Are you bound by appetite? I mean, I was watching, my daughter showed me something that it seemed to be an ongoing thing. I think it was on like TLC or something. Anyway, but she was showing me how that these people were addicted to food, right? I didn't know that was possible. But these folks had addiction to food, and they were just eating, and they can't help themselves, and they're crying, and they're saying, "Look, we're addicted," and they're like 600 pounds, 900 pounds. I saw they came to get one of them out to take them to the hospital, and they brought a crane. They had to demolish the house and the doorway for them to go in to take this person out, right? And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, is this God's intent for human beings? Right? But it's addictions, okay? And so I'm saying, if you're addicted to appetite, if you're addicted to the wrong desires, I mean, if you're bound by bad habits and so on, and these things hold on to you like a vice grip, it doesn't make sense. Stop thinking about gaining help through Alcoholic Anonymous, or through the 5-day program to stop smoking. Or I mean, this is not the answer to addictions. The answer to addiction is to actually seek the Son of God and receive the power from the Son of God to overcome all sins immediately. The moment you can believe, immediately that power is yours. Once you're a believer, you are free in the Son of God. The Son of God actually makes you free. Once you're enlightened about who you are, I mean, this is the reality that Jesus brought to us. Once you are enlightened about who you are and who you have been made to be, you are living in the victorious one who lives in you. Then you recognize it is not just a theory, it is an actual, factual, tangible thing that happens to the child of God once they become a part of that family of God. Now, I want you to consider something. When Jesus spoke about his Father's plan for the human race, his Father's plan to adopt children, to make them a part of his own family, what he told the people was that he came to be that channel through whom all the people of earth can, through Christ, become reunited to God. In fact, that verse in John chapter 6 and John chapter 14 and verse 6, where Jesus says, "I am the way and I am the truth and the life." Do you remember that verse? What he meant by that was the fact that he was the one channel to reach the Father. And it was by him, Jesus Christ, that God made to be the way to the Father. In fact, think about this. If he says he's the way to the Father, he simply means that he is the direction to the Father. You want to know the Father? Come to Jesus. It's only through Christ that you can know the Father. Why? Because he did say, "Father, thou in me and I in them." So that's the process. God came through Christ to us. We are going through Christ back to the Father. That's a chain that he has already arranged. When he said that I am the truth about the Father, what did he mean by that? He simply meant that when you look at Jesus, you're seeing the reality of God. He is the reality of God. He is the reality of God to us. So when Philip said to him, "Show us the Father, and it sufficeth us. We'll be satisfied." He said, "Philip, have I been so long with you, and yet you say, 'Show us the Father'?" What was he saying? He was saying, "He that has seen me has seen the Father." What you see in me, you'll see the same thing in the Father, because I and my Father are one. I and my Father are of the same kind. It wasn't saying that he and his father were one person. It was simply saying, I and my father are of the same nature. So what you see in me, you're seeing the same thing in the Father. When Jesus said that he was the life of the Father, I am the way, the truth, and the life. When he says that he was the life of the Father, what he was simply saying, he was the demonstration of the Father. So Jesus is the reality of God on this earth. No, notice I said that he is the reality. I did not say he was the reality. Jesus is the reality of God on this earth. Do you know why? Because Jesus is still on the earth. Do you understand why Christianity is about us dying? It's not that I am the reality of God on the earth, because I have died. I have died so that Jesus can come and take his place in me. So Jesus is the reality of the Father. Jesus showed us what God was like when he came to earth. He showed us what God was like. Do you know why? Because he was possessed by God. Jesus was possessed by God. Do you know how a demon possesses a person? Jesus was possessed in the same way. But more than that, today, both Jesus and God has come down to possess his children. We are possessed by God if we allow God to live his way and live his life through us. See, when a demon possesses a person, the demon takes over without the person's consent. But when you consent to have your body become the temple of the Holy Ghost, the temple of the living God, then you are possessed by God. And it ought to be that now that you're possessed, your words are his, your actions are, it's him that is working in you and through you, because that's how it was for Jesus. As children of God, we should be reflecting that reality in this world today. In fact, this is our mission. This is what God had intended. And that is why I believe when Jesus said, the works that I do, you shall do, and greater works, is because he knew the mission was that our bodies will become the temple of the Holy Ghost. And once, I don't want that to ever leave our minds. Our bodies are the temple of the Holy Ghost. He lives in us. God has said, Paul says, that I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I shall be their God, and they shall be my people. Now, here's something I found out. There are many today who are searching for truth. And they have made different transitions from different places, and they're still searching for truth. But truth is not determined by your geographic location. Truth is not determined by you coming here, you being on this forum or being on another forum, or by the amount of people that subscribe to it. So, I say, well, let me see how many people are online on this meeting and compare to how many people that are online on another meeting. That is not how truth is determined. Truth is not the numbers does not determine truth. Honestly, if we should go by numbers, then I think the church with the biggest membership would be the church with the most truth. Not true if we are going by numbers. And I guess in that case, the Catholic Church would be the place that has the most truth, since they have the most people, with over 1 billion people in their membership. But that is not true. If the Catholic Church has 1 billion people or over 1 billion people in their membership, then where would a church like the Adventist Church be with just 20 little bit, with 20 little million in there? They'll be far behind, in truth, if that was the case. In fact, let me just say this quickly, because I'd like to just say a little bit about the Trinity. And I've not done this in a long time. Talked about the Trinity. It's been something that had fascinated me way back in 94, 95. That was the only thing I talked about. I think I got my PhD in the Trinity, understanding and the truth about all that happened back then. And it's been a while I haven't said anything about that. But let me just ask you, does the Trinity tell the truth about God? Now, if we say the Trinity is false, then what the Trinity teaches, nobody can ever experience reality from that. Is that true? Based on what we have said. Now, could we, by believing the Trinity, then experience God? Not at all. Not accepting we have actually have an experience that goes beyond the teachings that we have received. And yet today, Christians subscribe to that teaching, because to not do so would be the cause of their church to be changed from Christians to a cult. Did you know that? Do you know that even even the Adventist Church way back in the 50s, when the leaders met with these two evangelicals, Barnos and Martin, that the reason was because they were classified. See, these guys were working on something for the World Council of Churches, and it was simply this, that those who does not subscribe to this idea of the Trinity would not be recognized as a Christian church. They'll be recognized as a cult. And so for this reason, these guys wanted to be sure that they were recognized by the World Council of Churches. They wanted to be sure that they were recognized as a Christian body. And so they sold out their church by accepting this damnable heresy into its teachings. And today, with all the historical references and the plainest word of God, that this erroneous falsehood destroys the personality of God, with all of that presented, they would vehemently defend not accepting this by the churches because they want to be accepted as a normal Christian body. Isn't that something interesting? Very interesting, don't you think? I mean, when I think about even these independent ministries with all the big names that they have and all of this and calling themselves independent, they still refuse to give up this idea of the Trinity. But I remember something, and I don't know if Brother David remember this, but I remember a couple of years back, there was a challenge that the General Conference gave to the independent ministries. I told you, this has been so long, I've not even looked at these things for all this while. But just how your memory is, I just remembering this now, that they gave a challenge that, you know how back in the 90s, I think it was, all of these independent ministries were calling themselves historic Adventists. I don't know if you remember that. Maybe the older folks like myself and Brother David and Brother Mark and so on will remember. But they were all calling themselves historic Adventists. So the General Conference gave a challenge to the historic Adventists, because back then we were thinking of people like David Moule, John Osborne. I mean, these different people were there with their big ministries, you know, Prophecy Countdown and all. Anyway, so here was the challenge. They said, these people are calling themselves historic Adventists. The General Conference gave this challenge, and I think I still have documentation, maybe somewhere, gathering dust somewhere. But you know what the challenge was? They said, are these independent ministries who are calling themselves historic, are they willing to go back to the historic position of the non-Trinitarian, the Arian view? So the General Conference actually knew that the historic position of Seventh-day Adventists was a non-Trinitarian position. And the challenge they hit the independent ministries with, and it was just a laughter for us, right? And just this: are you willing, as historic Adventists, to go back to the anti-Trinitarian position? And all the independents hushed. Nobody spoke a word because they could not. And so even you look at the level from which this came, that they were actually saying the truth is those people were not Trinitarians. George Knight confessed to it. William Johnson confessed to it. You know what George Knight said? George Knight said that if those people, if those pioneers of the Adventist church came to our church today, they would not be accepted as members. Did you know that? You know why? Because they said they would not have subscribed to the Trinitarian concept. And I'm just thinking, woo, what else do you want? But you know, when you have set your heart to go against God, it doesn't matter what a person brings to you, right? Once you're holding a position, and the position that most of these independents holds to is the position of the Adventist church, and they, even though they're not members, even though they talk about the church still has that. The conference says, are you willing to go back to that place? No, you're not willing to go back. So call yourself historic all you want, but if you're really historic, then you would be non-Trinitarian. But these independent ministries, they can't go back to that place because of the position that they hold. Now, I know people who personally, who will not accept anything that is not from the pioneers or Ellen White. I know people personally who are in that place, right? And I find this to be really something hard to understand, because I was taught that our church was given all the truths. Listen to what they taught me. Our church was given all the truths that would take us right through to the pearly gates. My church taught me that our church understood everything in the Word of God, that even the prophecies, all the prophecies were already fulfilled. Did you know that? I'm telling you, that's what they taught me. and that the one last sign that they're waiting for was simply for the scroll to be rolled back. I mean, I can prove this to you in so many different ways. They said there was one sign that we're waiting for. It's where and for how many years we've been living between these two signs. The last one was the star falling, 1833. And he says the one that is left is the scrolls, the skies to be rolled back as a scroll, and the Son of God, of man, coming through. That's what they said, because everything else is fulfilled. That's what they taught me. Now, honestly, could I actually believe this? I mean, that is why God had to take me out of the place where I was and show me that there were shaky grounds upon which we were all standing on. And so this line of truth that we were told that we were given, I realized it is not true. This line of truth, this is not true, because there were so many errors. There was so much errors that was involved in that. It was not true. I'm getting the wrap-up signal and I'm just starting. I'm sorry. Okay, so here's something I wanted to look at, right? I believe things because I was in ignorance, right? And I mean, no one could have convinced me. No one could have convinced me that God gave all the truth to one person and bound them up in some little red books called the Spirit of Prophecy. And that if you ever want to know the truth, you have to find those books. That is folly, and that is total garbage. Because once I understood what truth was, it made all the sense to me in the world. And it's so easy for the devil to have people believe these things, and that God has used only one channel of that is not true. The only channel of truth is Jesus Christ. And I think we need to get down to that part, right? Now, I remember, let me skip a couple of things here and come down to the meat of what I want to say. I mean, there were just some things that was just so hard. And I think I probably had too much notes in those things. How I saw, you know what I remember? I remember how Jesus said that these scribes and Pharisees, right, they sit in the seat of Moses. Do you remember that verse? He said they sit in the seat of Moses and they give the people burdens to bear that they will not even bear that little finger. And I realized it's the truth. I mean, when you look at these denominations and these controlling factors that is in people's life, that's how they deal. That's how they teach. They teach people. Look, you better do these things. Look, I remember when I was in the system. I remember the things that we used to talk about, and all we dealt with was obedience to the law. I mean, I was a preacher in the church, and all I dealt with was obedience to the law and Sabbath observance. Man, we discussed these things, we talked, and eventually we got even around to places like, look, if you have married couples, if you're married and you have sex on the Sabbath, it is a sin. All those things we sat down and discussed because we had nothing to say about Jesus. We simply, and we had quotes to back them up from books, and I mean, oh, the bondage of slavery, of denominationalism, when people just got you, just get you to a certain place where you believe what they say. It's mind control. I'm telling you, it's a brainwashing phenomenon. I mean, I remember even in our little country here in Jamaica, I could tell you, well, I'll tell you. I remember it's easy. A pastor gets involved with a woman in the church. That's not his wife. You know what they do? They move him to another church. They send him to another district. A poor brother gets involved, falls in adultery. And you know what they do? They disfellowship him. You know what that means? That he is no longer qualified for heaven. How can that be right? Look, here in our country, we have a conference president that is the face of the church. He's televised in Jamaica as being the face of the church. They found out that he had another woman apart from his wife. Do you know what these hypocrites did? They got some pastors in the night. They took him and baptized him in the night, brought him back, and he was the same face of the church on television. Just tell me the truth. The people that doesn't know this, they say, this is God's church, brother. Look, even the church does it, the pastor does that, God is leading our church. Don't give me that garbage. Don't give me that garbage. You can tell that to somebody who has not learned Christ, but you can't come to somebody who already knows Christ and give him that garbage. It will not go down. I'm telling you. But anyway, I think I've drifted off a little bit from my point. Now, here's Jesus in a conversation with a woman. I think, yeah, let's get down to this conversation. Jesus is in a conversation with a woman right by the well. Do you remember? It's the woman of Samaria, and he's in this conversation, and There was something that she always had in her heart. There was something that was always a puzzle in her mind. And so she comes and she meets Jesus, and Jesus does something and says something, and she recognizes that he is not a normal person, because nobody could have known about her personal and private life except he had some insight from the throne. And so this woman had a question, and look at what the question was. You know, the Jews says Jerusalem is where we ought to worship, and we, our fathers, worship in this mountain. Let me ask you, which is the right place to worship Jesus? Is it in this mountain, or is it at Jerusalem? And so this is the moment of truth that has come for this woman. And so Jesus gave her her answer, and the answer was simply this: neither of them, not in Jerusalem nor in this mountain. Jesus tells her something that is amazing, because look at what he says: the time is now. The time is now fulfilled, right at this spot, right here, right now, at this moment, that God is seeking for true worshipers to worship him. And Jesus makes it clear. He sets here a point where he says true worshipers will be differentiated from false worshipers. Now, look at what he says about the way true worshipers and false worshipers are different. He says, God is a spirit, and I'm sorry, I'm not, but you know the reference. This is verse 24 of John 4. He says, God is the spirit, and they that worship him must worship him how? In spirit and in truth. Now consider what he's saying. The true worshipers worships God in spirit and in truth. What does that mean? The true worship, what is involved in true worship is that your spiritual faculties are involved in your worship. It's not lip service. That's the point he's making, because Jesus made that clear, that this people draw nigh unto me with what? With their lips. But he says, your heart is far from me. Jesus says a true worshiper, his heart is involved in worship. His heart, his mind, his emotion, everything of the spiritual nature is involved in their worship. And not just that, but he says to worship in truth. What does that mean? It's not to worship in the correct understanding. No. To worship in truth simply means to worship in reality, to worship in experience. So what the true worshiper of God worships God from their heart, from their soul, from their mind, and they worship the reality of who they have been made to be in the new man. That's who they are. That's what the true worshippers does. But what's the contrast? Because the false worshiper worship in the legalistic obedience to the commandments, right? Do you recognize that Jesus never ever brought this idea of the keeping of the commandments except to the rich young ruler? And it was for a point. When he spoke to the rich young, he said, the rich young ruler. When he spoke to the rich young ruler, he said to him, keep the commandments. And why did he say that? Because he said he kept all from his youth. And so Jesus wanted to show him that if he was really worshiping in spirit and in truth, it would be no problem to sell all he had and give to the poor. So he contrasted that to say, okay, go ahead and keep the commandments. Was it that Jesus was saying is the keeping of the commandments that will bring life? No, it was trying to show him how he has done it all his life and still he was a selfish individual. That's the point he was bringing out. So I want you to look and understand that the false worshippers are more concerned about their actions, but not about their heart. They do the right thing, but they are themselves are not right. In fact, let me tell you this. The dictionary says that righteousness is right doing. That's not true. If you are not right, you can't do right. If you're righteous, if you're right, if the right one is in you, you can do right. But I know many people, and that's why we have the word hypocrite. There are many people who actually does right because it's the right thing to do. It doesn't mean that you are right. That's why you do right. You just do it to get a name, you do it to be praised. But what Jesus is saying, to worship God in spirit and in truth, is to have the reality from inside. Because look, out of the heart of man floweth all of these things. So you must be right from the inside before you can be right from the outside or on the outside. All right, so I have a wrap up of 2 minutes, did you say? Okay, so here I want to close with one last passage. I think you're familiar with this passage. In fact, I probably could go to this passage, but it's an encounter that Jesus had with Pilate right down in the last few hours of his life. Do you remember? They were having this conversation. His wife said, look here, don't touch this man. I had a dream last night. And all of this was, these things were taking place. In fact, let's read that in John. Let's go to John John chapter 18, I think it is. John 18. Let's go down to a couple of verses here, starting in verse 34. John 18:34. And you're going to see this conversation with Jesus and Pilate, right? And look at what Jesus says. Then Pilate entered the judgment hall again, and my Bible was not adjusted. Let me get that. Please take note of my time, my love. I'm adjusting my. All right, okay. All right, so here's at verse 30. Then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again and called Jesus and said unto him, Art thou the king of the Jews? And Jesus answered and said, Jesus answered him, saying, Thou sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it of thee? And Pilate said, I am a Jew. Am I a Jew? He asked the question to Jesus. He says, Am I a Jew? Thine own nation and chief priests have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? And Jesus said, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is from hence. Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? And look at this answer. Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice. And look at verse 38, very sad verse. Pilate said unto him, What is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again unto the Jews, and said unto them, I find no fault in him. One of the saddest pieces of scripture within the scripture. But look at what happened here. Pilate was right in the presence of the truth. Because there's only one truth, and that one truth is Jesus Christ. And if you have not found Jesus Christ, you are still in your error. Because I know many people who know a lot about Jesus, but they don't know Jesus. They know the verses that talks about Jesus. They know the doctrines about Jesus, but they don't know Jesus. The reality of Christianity is that you find him who is truth. There's only one truth. Truth is not theory. Truth is a person. Truth is an experience with a person. Truth is a relationship with a person. If you don't have that relationship, you do not have truth. You may know the theoretical correctness of certain things about him, but it is not knowing him. There's a difference with knowing him and knowing about him. I know majority of Christians today, they know a lot about Jesus, but they don't know Jesus. They argue about who he is, whether he's the Son of God or he was a part of a Trinitarian God. I mean, the argument is all there, but it is not an experience in Jesus. When you have an experience in Jesus, then it's all different. Only the experience in Jesus that can bring you deliverance. Only the experience in Jesus can give you victory over sin. And remember, if the Son has set you free, you are free how? You are free indeed. In other words, are you still in your sin? Just some final questions. Are you still in your sin? Are you still being plagued by sin? Are there those things that are what does Paul says? Those sins that easily beset you? Then there is something wrong with your experience, because what he's saying is there's a reality in Jesus that only Jesus can bring, and when you get that reality, it must be experienced. You will know beyond the shadow of a doubt who you are. Now, honestly, there are many people, Christians I'm talking about, there are many Christians today who still believe themselves to be sinners. They claim to be sinners. There is no time that they can see themselves as righteous. And these are the people that gets up every day and they pray, God, keep me from sin. And they come in and they say, Lord, forgive me for all the sins I've committed today. These are the people who are always sinning because they never recognize that they have been delivered from sin. You have been delivered from sin. I've been delivered from sin. I'm no longer a sinner. I can't be a son and a daughter of God. The Father and the Son can't dwell in me, and I'm a sinner. I am a righteous person. I've been made free. I've been made clean. I am a son of the Almighty God because his blood which is his life, is in me. It has set me free from sin. Now I stand before him like I've never sinned before. So when you're going to tell me about who I used to be, I mean, who is that? That was the dead person that existed back then. Now, who is alive is Jesus. He's in me. The search for truth never ends until you come face to face with Jesus Christ. And you have the experience of Jesus, you have the experience in you, and that is unshakable. So I'm encouraging you, brothers and sisters, family, friends, and all who will hear this message. The search for truth is only over when you find Jesus. No, not find the doctrines about him, not find the church, not coming to a forum where they talk a lot about Jesus. It is finding him personally. And I'm just so elated and blessed to know that myself and Brother David, all our since we have found and understood for ourselves this reality, we have made it our duty. We have made it a part of our duty and a part of our mission to bring Jesus to you. I give you Jesus today. I don't give you anything else. I have nothing else to give. I give you Jesus. May you accept him today. May you seek today to come to know him better. Lord, I've known you. I've known a lot about you. I've studied your words. I've read the scriptures. But you know what he said? He said, the scriptures talks about me. And true, they are they which testify of me, right? But you will not come to me that you may have life. Life is not in the scriptures. Life is not in the doctrines. Life is in the person Jesus Christ. I'm offering him to you today, and he's so willing to come and make his home in you. And he's so wanting to be a part of your life, and he's so wanting to flow out of you. He's so wanting your belly to become that river of living water that is going to flow to others, only if you will allow him. So my question in closing is this: will you allow him to live with you today, in you today? Will you allow him to possess you and take you over, take over your love and your life and everything, take over your entire outlook on life? Will you allow him? Because if you won't, then you are left on your own and you're still in sin. You have not been set free. I want to be free, and I'm hoping that you would have that desire to be free. I want to be free, and I want to remain free, and I want to remain in that place of safety. I want to remain in that place where his love and my love are one, where his life and my life is blended as one. And that's where he wants to be. And my prayer is that you will be in that place. I think I'm doing pretty well on time today, and all the praises be to his name. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening, and I really hope that the thoughts I was able to share today, I may have gotten off on the Adventist church a little bit there. I'm sorry about that if I offended somebody, but I was just talking about my experience. I wasn't trying to criticize. I was just telling you where I was and what I've seen, and I'm thanking God for where he has brought me, and that he has brought me to this place, and it's for a reason, that we can encourage each other and look up, knowing that our redemption draweth nigh. God bless you. Thank you. All right, so are there any questions or comments? Maybe I should just go ahead and close the recording, Brother David, and then we can do the questions and comments.